I would say, having reflected upon what happened in Germany, a country in which I grew up, and I was born in the middle of the war, and the city in which I grew up was 96% destroyed. They threw altogether 500,000 bombs over that city alone. So when you grow up and become conscious of all that, you begin to ask yourself questions as to why all that stuff happened. You know? It was the mother of all wars, and unimaginable destruction. Obviously, I began to reflect upon what happened in Germany prior to that, why someone like that came to power, namely Hitler. And so my interest in politics was really necessitated by trying to understand what happened during that time, trying to understand what is really almost not understandable. And when you really begin to look in the history prior to the advent and the rise of Hitler, you begin to somewhat understand it. And the seeds of that were sown after the First World War, namely with the Versailles Treaty, which was so punitive that Germans would have paid reparations for decades to come. So this Austrian clown came along and promised them relief from that, and he did. Anyway, so my interest in politics stems from trying to understand the rise of one of the great monsters the world has ever seen. So, and a lot of people over here don't understand how dangerous certain political moves can be. Hence my political interest. The country is being held hostage by a few ideologues on the right wing, and one resents it, you know. I think what we need to do away with is this notion of gerrymandering, of redistricting. That's one of the worst inventions ever. Then I think what they need to get rid of in the Congress is the idea of filibuster. You know, one or two people can hold it up. Then, of course, the other issue, which always has been one and always will be one, is the inordinate influence of lobbyists. And lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure in other capitals of the world, but I don't think quite to the extent that it exists here. When you realize that the pharmaceutical industry, for example, spent $250 million last year in persuading congressmen, politicians, to vote in certain ways, it's unconscionable as far as I'm concerned. So, and conversely, a lot of people in Congress, senators and representatives, will kind of tell big companies, unless some cash is forthcoming for my next election, I'm not going to vote for this or that piece of legislation. I remember when I came to America in 1959, you still had people on both sides of the aisles willing to compromise. Because the essence of democracy is compromise, you know, and that has gone out the window with the advent of the Tea Party. So that's a rather, I think, dangerous development, because it leads to a standstill. If you're not willing to compromise, not willing to give, what is that? That is the essence of politics and democracy. So, but that too will be solved, I'm sure. You know, we'll get over this. And, but what upsets me right now is the absolute determination on part of the opposition to Obama to nullify anything that he suggests. In other words, to kill it. And so as to make him as unsuccessful as they can make him. And that I resent enormously.
Oh.
So I don't think he's a wild-eyed liberal, far from it. Certain of the ideas were certainly worthy of being looked at very carefully, scrutinized carefully, and not being dismissed out of hand. But anything he does is dismissed out of hand. And I hope in the midterm elections that those who are the cause of that will lose their ass, I hope. So there you are. I remember the old days when Democrats and Republicans made deals together, you know, when Ronald Reagan could talk to Tip O'Neill, for example. And that has kind of disappeared right now, and that's sad. Nothing really. I haven't achieved a damn thing. I just say a few things here and there, you know. I think the gun issue in America to me is ludicrous. If indeed the Constitution provides in the Second Amendment the right to bear arms, then so be it, but that certainly did not mean that every Tom, Dick and Harry in this country has the right to have AK-47s or assault weapons. It's simply, that's obscene, simply obscene. Do I understand why a family wants to have maybe a gun in the house? Do I understand hunters? Of course. Do I understand the need for automatic weapons? No, I don't. Absolutely not. Do I understand the need for background checks, serious background checks? Yes, of course I do. Absolutely. It's any normal person. I mean, if you really look a normal person in the eye and say, do you honestly think your neighbor should have an AK-47? That's insanity. Absolute insanity. So, but do I think that people have the right, a single woman or family that is in need of protection, to have a weapon? Yeah. But I know, for example, that there's technology on the market that they simply don't want to accept that would make a weapon safe, that only you, the user, can use it. Your children could not take it and then suddenly just use it. They could not, no. There is that technology available. I know so. And they don't want any part of it. Don't even want that. They don't want any infringement whatsoever. Now that kind of thing makes one angry. You know, why? Just be reasonable. I'm not saying that they should be eliminated. No one should have a gun. That's wishful thinking. But to have automatic weapons, to have assault weapons, that's insanity. So I know that there's technology available by a company called Armatrix, and they can fix a weapon so that only the person responsible whose fingerprint is on it can use it. That is safety. Then you have guns and at the same time safety. But they don't want any part of it. Anyway, on to the next subject.
Well, one next thing I'll ask you about is about the time you spent in Israel, actually.
Say what again?
The time you spent in Israel.
Yeah.
I guess we just want to know what the experience was like going over here.
My experience in Israel has been very good. I've been there 2 or 3 times. Been very good. As a German of my generation, I obviously want to make absolutely certain that what happened in the Second World War will never happen again. I will always support Israel, and because of the disastrous experiences that Jews were subjected to during the Second World War, that must never be repeated. It is a disaster of untold proportions, and so therefore I will always be in support of the existence of Israel. Do I always agree with their policies? Not necessarily, but I don't live there. It's too complicated of an issue for me to deal with. Do I want, am I at the same time, as a German, upset by the continuing vilification of anything German in a lot of films, the continuous references to Nazi Germany, which was a 12-year period in German history. That pisses me off, obviously. But beyond that, my attempt was to bridge a gap as much as possible. What people forget is that Jews were more successfully assimilated in Germany prior to Hitler's arrival than anywhere in the world. More successfully than here in America, for example, or in England, or in France. So one must not forget that. So it's a very complex issue for a German to deal with. I have confronted it directly by creating the German-American Culture Society, where we fostered German-Jewish dialogue, because I wanted us not to talk past each other, but with each other. And that was something I was very active in. I played soccer for a Jewish team as a token German, with someone else, another friend of mine who was German, and we won the US Championship in 1973, and with a team called the Maccabees. And during the week I would wear the Nazi uniform, playing on series like the Rat Patrol and Combat, and on weekends I would have the Star of David, so to the confusion of a lot of people. So I'm German, I'm not Jewish, but I felt it necessary to humanize the relationship between Germans and Jews, and that we would have a dialogue. That I found vitally important. And that is what I wish would happen right now in Congress, a dialogue. When people are ideologically opposed to each other, and diametrically opposed to each other, and don't even talk, that's a bad thing. Hence, I'm very upset by what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. So, I've seen a lot of changes in this country. When I came, the racial divide was stark, obvious, bitter. And I've seen a lot of changes since 1959, when I first came here. A lot of changes for the good. Very much for the good. I'm very hopeful. I know that Germany, for example, after the Second World War, has been enormously supportive of Israel, although that is rarely mentioned. It has sent financial help, military help, technical help, scientific exchanges, etc., etc. So dialogue is necessary. We need to discover what we have in common as human beings, not what divides us from an ethnic point of view. That's gone, that time is gone. And so that concerns me. Whenever I see movements to the contrary, away from reconciliation, then I become concerned. Well, that's a good question. I don't think I can do much, but I certainly, in order to deal with my own conscience, I needed to do something. And I know from my experience playing with the Maccabees, I know that a lot of groups just talk past each other. They do not take the time to find out what they actually have in common. And there's nothing like sports to bring you together.
Oh, definitely.
And so, I don't know what kind of voice I had. I think minimal, incremental. But I just, to satisfy my own conscience about that, I felt I had to do that, to attempt something. Because I've seen too many people who become bitter on both sides. In this case, German side and Jewish side. Germans who felt offended of the constant vilification after the Second World War in Hollywood films, and Jews who never wanted to do anything with Germans. And I thought this is an enormous waste of potential. And it was a good relationship.